Welcome to Cafe Tales. Tonight, Poirot and Hastings journey north to Blackwood Grange, a land where winds whistle through ruined towers and where music plays in the night, though no hand touches the keys. A pale child is glimpsed upon the terrace, and whispers of old tragedies stir once more. This is The Ghost of Blackwood Grange, an original mystery written by us in homage to Agatha Christie and her legendary detective Hercule Poirot. Inspired by the ghost lore of England's northern dales, it is told entirely in our own words. Before we begin, where in the world are you listening from tonight? I read every one of your comments, and seeing where we gather from makes this storytelling circle feel wonderfully alive. Now, let us step inside Blackwood Grange. Chapter 1. Arrival at Blackwood Grange. There are certain parts of England which, when one first sets foot upon them, seem to declare at once, "Here we keep to our own ways, and strangers are best advised to tread carefully." The northern dales had that quality in abundance. The moors stretched bare and brooding on either side. The wind blew with a mournful note, and at last, upon a rise of ground, we saw the house itself. Blackwood Grange. It was a long, low building of dark stone, its windows sunk deep as if they did not wish to be disturbed, and a square tower, defiant but half-ruined, stood watch at one corner. Poirot, wrapped meticulously in his overcoat beside me, shivered and frowned. Mon ami, already my bones protest. Damp, it enters, it insinuates. To the English, such a place is romantic. To me, it is rheumatism waiting at the door. I laughed. You'll be glad enough of the fire, Poirot, and perhaps there will be excellent cooking. Let us hope, Hastings, he sighed. For in such a place, one forgives many things to a good chef. But without him, he lifted a finger solemnly, it is barbarism. The drive ran through dark fir trees before opening suddenly onto the forecourt. Waiting on the steps was a woman in black, with keys at her waist, her hair drawn tightly back. Mrs. Holloway, housekeeper, she announced. Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, you'll be expected. Poirot bowed. Madame, at your service. She led us through the hall, a chill place of flagstones hung with portraits of wits long gone, each of them gaunt and unsmiling. I was glad when at last we were shown into the morning room, where a fire burned brightly and a young lady rose to greet us. She was slight, fair, and with that transparent look some English girls have, as though too much wind might blow them away. Yet her eyes were steady, if shadowed. Mr. Poirot, she said, thank you for coming. I am Clarissa Whitcombe. My aunt believes I am overwrought. I dare say I am. But something is very wrong here, and I cannot rest until I know what it is. She gave me her hand properly. It was cool and trembled faintly. I liked her at once. Poirot arranged himself in an armchair, hat upon his knee, mustaches bristling with order. Begin at the beginning, mademoiselle. But first, I reassure you, I am not a priest of exorcisms, nor do I carry charms against the evil eye. We shall rely upon the little gray cells. Proceed. Clarissa smiled wanly. It began 3 weeks ago. I was in the gallery after dinner. There's an old organ there, long out of use. I heard music, clear as anything, coming from the organ itself. It was a hymn I used to know as a child, one my nurse would play to quiet me. When I opened the door, nothing. Poirot inclined his head gravely. And the next incident? The night after, nearly midnight. I was in my room when I heard the music again. I looked out toward the terrace, and I saw a child, a little girl in white, holding up her hand as if beckoning. Then she was gone. When I hurried downstairs, all was silent, all locked. I confess to a little shiver at this. Clarissa's sincerity was unmistakable. At that moment, Mrs. Holloway, who had hovered, spoke in a lowered tone. "It's the same as before, miss. I told cook. The Grange keeps its secrets." Clarissa turned quickly. "That will do, Mrs. Holloway." But Poirot was watching with interest. "As before, madam?" The housekeeper pursed her lips. "The old story, sir. A Whitcombe child long ago that perished one winter's night. Folks say her spirit walks, and the music plays her in." Poirot tapped his fingertips together. "A legend convenient to those who wish to believe. Yet if one desires to drive a nervous young lady to distraction, such tales are also convenient." "Are they not?" Clarissa colored slightly. "I am not fanciful, Mr. Poirot. If someone is contriving these things, I beg you to find out." "Rest assured, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "We shall. We will examine your gallery, your terrace, your windows, and tonight we will see whether your phantom organist performs again." It was then that the door opened, and a tall woman entered with the commanding tread of one long accustomed to obedience. Lady Margaret Whitcombe, Clarissa's aunt, surveyed us coldly. "So," she said, "my niece has brought in a detective. Mr. Poirot, I hope you do not indulge her fancies. This house needs strong will, not talk of phantoms." Poirot bowed. "Madame, I seek only the truth. Ghosts or no ghosts. We shall know what walks in Blackwood Grange." Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. "See that you do. Dinner is at 8. Dr. Redfern will join us. He is a man of sense, and I trust his judgment more than superstitious chatter." And with that, she swept away, pearls gleaming against the black of her gown. Poirot looked after her with a little smile. A strong character, Hastings? But when one protests too much, one reveals something also. That night promised to be interesting indeed. Chapter 2. The Music in the Night. Dinner at Blackwood Grange was an exercise in good breeding and bad temper. The dining room, with its long table and stern-faced Whitsons upon the walls, was lit by shaded lamps that contrived to make the silver gleam in the soup look apologetic. Lady Margaret presided with an air of duty performed. Clarissa sat at her right, pale but composed. Opposite me was Dr. Alfred Redfern, a man of 45 or so, neat in his dress, with an agreeable voice, and the practiced calm of one who has seen a great many cases and prefers them all to be straightforward. "Exhaustion," he said in response to some remark of Lady Margaret's. "Overwork of the nerves. Miss Whitcombe needs a change of scene. A rest cure at Bath would do wonders." Clarissa looked at her plate. "I have done very little to exhaust myself, doctor." "Exactly," said Redfern, smiling pleasantly. "Idleness is the enemy of the nerves. The mind, given too much leisure, invents excitements." "I do not invent music," said Clarissa quietly. Of course," the doctor murmured. "Perception is a curious matter. We hear all manner of things at night." Poirot, who had been observing the carved game birds upon the sideboard with the attention of a general inspecting troops, spoke at last. "Night is inconvenient. It turns the most ordinary object into a threat. A curtain moves, one imagines a hand. A sound in the next room, one imagines footsteps. Yet the curtain is only a draught, and the sound a board that resents the winter." Lady Margaret set down her glass. "Precisely. Mr. Poirot understands. We shall drop this subject, Clarissa." "Certainly," said Clarissa, but the set of her mouth did not suggest capitulation. Richard Whitcombe came late to the pudding, a well-made young man with the bluff good humor of a school captain. He apologized to his aunt for the delay, something about a jammed magneto on the motor car, and made himself agreeable to the rest of us. His eyes were gray and extremely candid. "It has been my experience," Poirot murmured, "that eyes which are extremely candid bear watching. Ghastly weather," he said to me when the ladies had retired, "but the trout will be lively tomorrow if the wind turns. You fish, Captain Hastings?" "When permitted," I said, amused. "Then we'll make a morning of it." Poirot, who has never caught a fish in his life and regards the English passion for standing in cold water as a symptom, said he would be occupied elsewhere. Richard laughed, accepted a cigar, and chatted of horses and county matters. He was the last man, one would have said, to produce a ghost in the small hours. That, of course, is precisely the sort of man who does. We excused ourselves early. Poirot professed to be tired by the draughts. There was a permanently affronted whistling at the far end of the passage, and allowed Mrs. Holloway to show us to our rooms. Mine was comfortable enough. His, by his specification, had a good view of the gallery door and the turn of the corridor that led to the service stair. When we were alone, he drew me to the threshold and spoke softly. "Listen, Hastings. We have the tale. But now we must have the timetable. Always there is a timetable. Who goes where and when? Tonight, these are the points of observation: the gallery door, Miss Whitcomb's window, the terrace beneath, and the approach from the service stair. We must also learn whether the music is truly of the organ or of some other contrivance. A gramophone, perhaps, or a small harmonium placed cleverly, or simply the power of suggestion and a willing ear. But we will not decide until we have seen. How do you propose to witness all that at once? By not being an army of two, mon ami." He tapped the bell. "We shall borrow a soldier." Mrs. Holloway appeared. Poirot explained with the utmost courtesy that we wished the assistance of a reliable manservant for a few hours, someone who could keep watch discreetly and had no nervous notions. "Tom will do," she said at once. "Tom Perry, solid as a gatepost." Tom proved to be just that, a square-shouldered young fellow with a straightforward gaze. Poirot positioned him on a chair in the main corridor with instructions to note anyone passing after 10 o'clock. Mrs. Holloway, an unwilling conspirator, was assigned the back passage that led to the boiler room. I took Miss Whitcomb's window seat as my station, with explicit orders to keep the curtains just so, enough to see, not enough to be seen. Poirot himself, with a patience I cannot emulate, took up position in the little anteroom near the gallery door, where through a narrow crack the latch could be observed. We waited. The house settled into its cavernous breathing. Fire sank. Pipes ticked. Old wood gave tiny complaints of age. Once or twice I heard the quick step of a maid, and once the slower tread of Mrs. Holloway making her rounds. From somewhere beyond the east wing came an intermittent metallic note. Tick, 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 like a distant clock slightly out of patience with itself. The wind had dropped, and the night lay cold and clear upon the terrace. I could see the line of the balustrade, the faint pallor of frost on the paving. I kept my eyes upon the spot Clarissa had indicated. At 11:45 came a minute agitation in the corridor, a whisper, the lightest scuff, as if someone had peered from a door and withdrawn. I held my breath. A figure appeared below in the darkness, no more than a paler shadow at first, then unmistakably the shape of a small child in a light dress. She stood quite still, her hand slightly lifted, and then turned, her head as though listening to a call I could not hear. I confess a chill ran down my spine in spite of myself. It was not merely the apparition, it was the stillness with which it stood, like a wax model come to life. Then I heard it. The music. Soft at first, then fuller. The notes of an organ swelled from the direction of the gallery. The tune, if tune it may be called, was slow and simple, the sort of thing one picks out without much skill. A hymn, yes. I remembered then what Clarissa had said, that it was the very air her nurse once played to her as a child. The recognition sent a fresh chill through me. It held, however, a curious quality of coming and going, as though the sound thickened and thinned with the turning of a handle. The child's figure shifted, and with a movement as light as breath, it was simply not there. I strained my eyes, my heart thudding ridiculously. Nothing. The terrace lay blank and gray. Down. The corridor behind me, a board creaked. I forced myself to attend to my task. Note the time. The sequence. 11:48. First notes. 11:50. Apparition vanishes. 11:52. The music faltered, picked up, and then ceased altogether. A moment later, Poirot's whisper sounded from the anteroom. Hastings. I went at once. He was standing by the gallery door, which remained locked, keyhole winking brass. His face, even in the dim light, had the look he wears when something that ought to be obvious has condescended to reveal itself. You heard? And saw. Good. We will not speak of what we think, only of what we know. We know that. The music was heard, that the door was not opened. Observe Tom's report. Tom, who had the air of a man too respectful to call a gentleman a liar, confirmed that no one had passed, save Mrs. Holloway on her circuit and Dr. Redfern, who had gone to his room at 11, muttering about papers left in his bag. We know. Also, Poirot went on, that there is a draught here, feel it, and that the draught increases when the music plays. And we know, he stooped and touched the brass of the keyhole, that this is slightly warm. Warm? I exclaimed. Very slightly, but enough for the sensitive finger. Come. He led me, not into the gallery, which we could not enter, but down the service stair and along the passage to the room labeled boiler. The air here was warmer, with that faint metallic tang that belongs to machinery. In the corner stood a small auxiliary pump with a belt and a wheel. An addition, Mrs. Holloway later told us, from the previous owner's day, used to assist heating when the main system sulked. Poirot bent to examine the belt, then the floor beneath it. There was a dusting of fine powder, grayish, with a glitter in it, and a small black smear on the edge of the wheel. He touched it and smelt his finger. Oil, he said. There is the ghost's perfume. I don't seek patience, we go up again. Back at the gallery door, he took from his pocket the smallest of pocket torches, screened it with his hand, and illuminated the skirting at floor level. There, almost invisible unless one knew to look, a fine filament of white lay against the wood and vanished into a hairline crack between skirting and floorboard. Thread? I ventured. Cotton, said Poirot. Common, freshly broken. He did not attempt to pull it, but traced with his eye the line of the boards. A channel, beneath the floor, he murmured. A conduit for heat, or for sound, and perhaps for something else. He straightened. We shall not break in at midnight, even for a phantom. We will return at a civilized hour, with the key. We dispersed our little garrison and retired. I confess that sleep was slow in coming. The image of the white figure upon the terrace, so slight, so very still, persisted in my mind. I told myself that children do not appear and vanish, that what I had seen was a trick of light and expectation. Yet my reason was not entirely satisfied. Chapter 3. Family Shadows. Poirot closed the tiny panel in the organ case with the gentlest pressure of his fingertips and regarded the calm face of the instrument as though it were an accomplice that had at last confessed. "Now, Hastings," he said, "we have learned how the ghost speaks. What remains is to learn who teaches it its lines." Clarissa stood very straight, her hands knotted together. "You believe me?" Then, that someone meant me to hear it. "I believe, mademoiselle, that someone prefers you should doubt yourself. We will not permit that." He turned. "If you please, Lady Margaret, may we trouble you in the library?" Lady Margaret gave the smallest of nods. "If there must be questions, ask them quickly. There is work to be done in this house." We followed her downstairs. The library smelt of polish and old vellum. Ledgers lay ready on the desk with a neatness that implied a long habit of accounts. Poirot remained standing. "Madame." A contrivance was found within the gallery case, a little box that makes a very persuasive music when commanded. It is not, you will agree, the work of a moment, nor of a fool. "Then some impertinent person has been given far too much liberty," Lady Margaret said crisply. "Dismissal will cure it." "Liberty? Yes," Poirot murmured. "And knowledge. The gallery is kept locked. 2 keys only, you told me, my niece's and yours. And yours remains in your desk?" "It does. You will forgive me." Poirot's hand indicated the escritoire. Lady Margaret's gaze held his a moment, then she unlocked a drawer and produced a small leather case. Inside, 2 keys gleamed side by side. "You see, perfectly." Poirot bent a fraction, not touching, merely looking. "And has anyone other than yourself the freedom of this desk?" "No." "Then the phantom has learned to enter by the window, and the scrape upon its latch is the phantom's signature." He inclined his head. "One last matter. Who within the house knew of Miss Whitcomb's childhood hymn?" Lady Margaret's expression did not change. "I am not sentimental. I do not sing to children." "Just so," said Poirot, as if that also were an answer. "I thank you." We withdrew. In the corridor, Poirot's eyes traveled to a bell pull whose rope showed a thin, recent fray, as if tried by an uncertain hand. "Observation," he murmured, and said nothing more. We found Richard in the billiard room, sleeves pushed back, idly attempting a difficult cut. He greeted us with his usual good humor. "So, you've unmasked our phantom organist, Monsieur Poirot? Splendid. I thought as much." "You thought it a trick?" "Of course. Country houses produce tricks the way orchards produce apples, and yet you did not think to examine the organ yourself." Richard laughed. "I haven't the curiosity of a cat. What matters is that Clarissa can be put at ease." Poirot's gaze slipped to the chalk upon the cue, then to the faint smear of black at the cuff of Richard's tweed. Nothing. Perhaps. But something oily had once touched it. He did not comment. "Last night," he said instead, "you retired at 11. So I told you, and slept at once." "Pretty well, yes." "Then you will have heard nothing of the music which began shortly before midnight." Richard's eyes flickered. Annoyance, I thought, at being put upon his honor. "No. You keep your own motor car here in the coach house. Why?" "A curiosity only." Poirot's voice was mild. "There are marks upon the terrace stone at the height of a car step, or a ladder. The country air gives me ideas. You see?" He set the cue lightly upon the table, straightening it by a hair's breadth. "You are fond of your cousin, monsieur?" "Certainly, and of Blackwood Grange." Richard's smile thinned. Fondness is a word for summer. The Grange is a ledger. Columns of shingles, gutters, wages. If Clarissa breaks under the strain, Aunt Margaret will take the reins, and I'll be trotted out as the useful male relation. I would rather fish. Useful people, said Poirot gently, are sometimes used. We left him making a shot that he ought to have made, and did not. Dr. Redfern had installed himself in the morning room with a medical bag on the table beside him, as if to remind the furniture of his professional status. An ingenious device, he said when Poirot described the little box in the gallery. I congratulate you. It explains a great deal. It explains the sound, Poirot returned, not the intention. Tell me, doctor, did you pass the main corridor at 11 last night? I did, he said without hesitation. I had left a paper in my room, and later I retired. And you did not observe the music which several persons heard. He smiled. I am a heavy sleeper. So heavy, said Poirot, that you walked in your sleep down the back passage. Redfern's eyes hardened. I do not walk in my sleep. Mr. Poirot, then we are relieved. Poirot's politeness had the exact weight of a paper knife. You have known Miss Whitcombe since childhood? Not since childhood, since her father's death. And your advice to Lady Margaret, unchanged, rest, removal from the scene of her fancies. From the scene, Poirot repeated as if trying the phrase for balance. Yes, when the stage is dismantled, the play ends, he bowed. I am obliged. In the corridor, Poirot paused where the back way turned toward the boiler room. He crouched with a painful little exclamation, he never loves cold stone, and touched a faint dark smudge near the skirting. Oil again, he said. The house has many conveniences, and many people to use them. I returned. He gave me a look, half approval, half mischief. Progress, Hastings. We found Mrs. Holloway in the still room, supervising the bottling of something that smelt medicinal. She wiped her hands on her apron and faced us squarely, as one who has no time for nonsense, but suspects she's about to hear some. Madame, said Poirot, in a house such as this, the servants know the truth long before their masters. Who among your people has the quick hand with string, with wire, with the fixing of little things? Who mends? Who contrives? Who cannot leave a loose screw in peace? Tom is a handy lad, she said at once, but he wouldn't frighten Miss Clarissa, not if you paid him. And outside the servants' hall, she hesitated. Mr. Richard has a knack for engines. The doctor, too. He'll have a go at the boiler when it sulks, and then it sulks worse. And Lady Margaret? Mrs. Holloway's expression became a fortress. Her ladyship keeps to her own affairs. One last thing, said Poirot. Years ago, this story of a child on the terrace. You said it had begun again. Who used that phrase first? Her eyes shifted. Genuine effort, not evasion. I don't rightly know. It's what people say, Mr. Poirot. Things get said and then they're true until someone stops them. Just so. He nodded gravely, and she relaxed the smallest degree. When we emerged into the passage, Clarissa was waiting, her anxiety tightly reined. Well, she asked. For the moment, said Poirot, we know enough to be patient, and not enough to be safe. You will not sit alone at your window after dark. You will keep your door bolted, and ring if there is the least disturbance. She colored. I did not mean to be foolish. It is not foolish to be alarmed when one is attacked, Poirot said very gently. And make no error. This is an attack. He turned to me. "Come, Hastings, we will take a small walk." The afternoon had settled in a stubborn gray. We went out by the side door and crossed to the terrace. Poirot examined the shallow scrape upon the stone once more, then stepped off a measured distance to the gallery windows, counting under his breath. "From here," he said, "a figure as tall as, shall we say, Mr. Richard, might raise a little puppet to the sill. A rod. Light. Wood. There is the mark where such a rod might rub. The white of a sheet, the turn of a small face, wax or chalk. One grips the heart before the eyes correct it." "And the thread?" I asked. "The thread runs where threads run, where mice run, where heat runs, where people do not look. It is the nature of threads to be believed in only when they tangle the foot." He moved to the window latch, studying the bright nick there, then looked across the lawns toward the shelter of a clipped yew. A narrow path ran from the shrubbery to the coach house and onto the yard. "Two approaches," he said. "One respectable, one private, both used by those who belong." He stood quite still, breathing steam into the cold. I have seen him in such moments before, as if something very small had fitted into a place in his mind, and now the whole contrivance waited only to be wound. "We will not accuse," he said at last. "Not yet. There is a little more to learn. Tonight, we set a trap." "What trap?" "A simple one. A ghost that performs on cue expects an audience. We will disappoint him, yet give him applause all the same. He would say no more." It was dusk when we returned indoors. Lamps had been lit, and the house took on that air great houses have at the falling of evening, a gathering of itself, a holding of breath. In the hall we encountered Richard coming in from the yard, his boots clean but damp at the soles. He wished us good evening with his usual cheerfulness. A moment later, Dr. Redfern emerged from the study, a folded note in his hand and the faintest smear of black upon his thumb. Poirot's eyes missed none of it. He is kind to people's vanities, but not to their carelessness. After dinner, he told me, "You will sit with Miss Whitcombe and play bezique. You will talk of anything but music. At 11, you will go to your room and wait. And you? I shall attend to the stage machinery." He smiled, complacent. I might almost have said, if I had not known that such smiles with him are shudders over something much sharper. "If the ghost walks tonight," he added, "we will offer it the courtesy it deserves." "And what is that?" "To catch it in the act." He adjusted the crease of his sleeve with meticulous care, and went in search of Mrs. Holloway to make arrangements that would, he said, offend nobody and inconvenience everybody, which, in Poirot's etiquette, is the proper way to invite truth to come out of hiding. Chapter 4. A Chill in the Corridor. Dinner at Blackwood Grange that evening passed under a strange restraint. Lady Margaret was more imperious than usual, Richard more jovial, Dr. Redfern more urbane. Clarissa spoke scarcely at all. Poirot was at his most polished, conversing lightly about Belgian cookery and the virtues of proper boot polish. He, who knew the signs, recognized that his silence on the subject that preoccupied us was deliberate. He was waiting. After the ladies withdrew, Richard pressed cigars upon us, but Poirot declined. "Not tonight, mon ami. The smoke interferes with the precision of the senses. I must be exact, you understand." That remark silenced even Richard's good humor. We soon joined the ladies, where Clarissa had obediently set out the bezique cards. Lady Margaret, knitting in a chair by the fire, maintained the watchful presence of a magistrate. Poirot excused himself on some pretext of papers, and disappeared. So it was that Clarissa and I began our game. She played listlessly at first, but rallied when I teased her about my poor memory for scores. There is nothing like being accused of cheating to stiffen a young woman's spirit, and soon she was counting points with the briskness of a cruiser. I was glad to see her color return, though her eyes flicked now and again toward the long windows, as though expecting them to fly open. At 10, Lady Margaret retired, declaring herself in need of rest. Dr. Redfern followed soon after, protesting his late letters. Richard lingered, whistling under his breath, then at last stretched and went out, calling that the stables must be checked before morning. Clarissa and I were left alone. The minutes dragged. The house seemed to listen to itself. Fires sank. Lamps hissed faintly. And somewhere in the corridor, a board cracked like a pistol shot. Clarissa's hand trembled over her cards. Then it came. First, the faint swell of music. Slow, halting notes. The ghostly hymn upon the organ. Clarissa started upright, lips parted. I confess my own skin prickled. The sound drifted down the passage, thinned, strengthened, faltered again. Clarissa whispered, "It is the same." I rose and went to the door. The corridor lay dim, the lamps shaded, and there, by the turn of the stair, a white figure stood, a child's form, hand raised. Clarissa stifled a cry. I confess that for an instant my reason failed me. The sight was uncanny, still as a carving, pale against the shadows. Then it moved, beckoned, and began to glide away. At that moment, a small but decisive sound reached me, the snap of a match. Poirot's voice followed, cool and precise. "Hold very still, Hastings." The lamps along the corridor sprang into fuller glow. The figure jerked, staggered, and collapsed into a heap of linen and wax upon the flagged floor. A rod of light wood clattered beside it. Clarissa gave a half-sob, half-laugh of relief. I went forward and picked up the thing. It was indeed nothing more than a child's dress stuffed with padding, a wax mask affixed to the head, the arm jointed with wire to lift at command. From the shadow by the gallery door, Poirot emerged, pocket, torch in hand. His mustaches quivered with satisfaction. "Voila," he said. The ghost, interrupted mid-performance. We carried the effigy into the drawing room. Clarissa shrank from it while Poirot examined the mechanism with interest. A simple rod through a slit in the wall panel, he explained. When pushed, the figure advances. When withdrawn, it retreats. Very effective in dim light, especially if the watcher already expects to see a child. "But the music," Clarissa whispered. "I hear it still." Indeed, the hymn continued faintly. Poirot held up a hand. "Attend." He knelt, drew a thread from beneath the skirting, and gave it a sharp tug. Somewhere deep in the walls, the hidden motor stirred. At once, the organ's reeds faltered, ceased, then began again as he slackened the pull. The contraption in the organ, mademoiselle, our phantom's orchestra, obeys the chord of a puppeteer. Clarissa pressed her hands together. "But who would do such a thing, and why?" "That, mademoiselle, is the play within the play," Poirot replied. "Tonight we have seen the trick. Tomorrow we shall consider the trickster." He turned to me. "Hastings, kindly lock this charming puppet in the small cupboard by the fire. It will not walk again until I permit." I obeyed, glad enough to shut the thing from sight. Clarissa, pale but calmer, managed a smile of gratitude toward Poirot. He bowed with grave courtesy. "You will sleep safely tonight, Miss Whitcombe." The ghost has lost its cue. And with that assurance, he saw her too. The stairs himself, leaving me to puzzle over the shadowed faces of the family and servants alike, each of whom by morning would be forced to account for more than just their nerves. Chapter 5. The Mask of the Ghost. We did not sleep very much. The effigy, linen and wax in a child's shape, might have been locked away, but it sat in one's thoughts like a cold weight in the hand. When I came down, I found Poirot in the morning room, already immaculate and unexpectedly cheerful, as if the house had decided overnight to be reasonable. "Good," he said. "Coffee and then the housekeeping of truth." He sent Tom Perry on a series of errands with the gravity of a field marshal. A note delivered to the village constable. "Inform Inspector Graves that I beg he remain within reach, but not visible." A request for lamp oil, a length of clean cotton, and a twist of soft wax from the pantry. While Tom trotted off, Poirot and I made a little tour: the gallery, the corridor, the drawing room with its innocent-looking cupboard. "You propose to set another trap?" "Mon ami, one for the fingers, one for the conscience." He would not be drawn further, but I saw what he did. He touched the thread emerging from the skirting in the gallery, coating, by some invisible method of his own, a small stretch with the faintest trace of soot. Then in the drawing room, he sealed the cupboard seam with a hair from his own head, laid crosswise and fixed at each end with those minute dots of pantry wax. I noticed he had mixed the wax with a speck of blacking from the grate, so that the film would leave its trace on any careless hand. "It is a vulgar trick," he said, almost with pride, "but effective. You expect the thief to remove the puppet. I expect the thief either to destroy the proof or to protect it. In both cases, he must touch what I have prepared. One cannot stage a haunting without also staging the cleanup." Lady Margaret swept in upon us. Then she looked neither to right nor left, but her nostrils said a good deal. "I am told," she said, "that some theatrical properties were found in my corridor last night. Kindly remove them at once. I will not have my servants discomposed." "Already done, madame," said Poirot pleasantly. "Nothing now remains but the motive. The motive is mischief. Dismiss whoever is responsible and have done with it." "When we know who is responsible," said Poirot quite gently, "we shall be done with it." He bowed, and she could do no more than dismiss us with a nod. We visited Mrs. Holloway next. She was brisk and pale, as one who had passed a disturbed night. "The house is all a tongue, Mr. Poirot. There'll be no getting cook to settle her stew if she thinks the dead walk." "The dead do not walk," said Poirot, "but the living may run." "Tell me, Mrs. Holloway, Miss Whitcomb's nurse, the one who used to play the hymn. What was her name?" "Mrs. Blakely, sir. Gone these 10 years. She taught the tune to others." "Not to me," said Mrs. Holloway quickly. "I can't play a note." After a pause, she added, "Mr. Richard can pick out a hymn or two. And the doctor, he's had a go at the harmonium at Harvest Festival when the organist was ill. That was years back." "Très bien," said Poirot. "You are a treasury, Mrs. Holloway. Guard your staff from tales for one more day, if you please." By luncheon, the household was outwardly composed and inwardly taut. Richard made determined conversation. Dr. Redfern was amiable enough to butter stones. Clarissa kept her eyes on her plate and ate nothing. Poirot was as light as a cork on water. He admired a dish of kippers and lamented English tea habits. Only once did he glance at the mantel clock. Afterward, he excused himself with a bow. "I have a small appointment, Hastings." "You will be so good as to accompany Miss Whitcombe in a walk upon the terrace. The air, it will refresh." We did as we were told. The sky had that white look which promises neither rain nor mercy. Clarissa walked beside me silently for some minutes. Then, without looking up, she said, "If it is Richard, if it is my aunt, would you tell me at once?" "You must trust Poirot," I said gently. "He will tell you when telling will help, not when it will harm." "I do trust him," she said. "It is myself I do not trust, any more than they do." Before I could reply, a small figure came skimming across the lawn. Tom Perry, attempting not to run. He presented himself to me with respectful anxiety and murmured, "Beg pardon, sir. Mr. Poirot asks if you'd look in on him, discreet-like." Clarissa returned indoors under Mrs. Holloway's wing, and I made my way to the boiler room. The door stood ajar. Inside, Poirot was kneeling, a posture that always makes him look as though he suffers to be useful, beside the auxiliary pump. He held up a finger for silence and pointed. On the floor between the pump and the wall, where a narrow space ran, a faint line of chalk crossed the boards, as though a careless painter had drawn his brush there and forgotten it. Beyond the line were a blurred print of boots, 2 steps only, leading in and out again. "When one lays powder in a passage," Poirot whispered, "one does not need to ask who passed. One asks, when." He produced a small piece of paper from his pocket, on which he had jotted times. At 10 minutes past 2, the marks were not there. At 20 past, they were faint. At 1/2 past, clearer. Therefore, our visitor came at approximately 20 minutes past 2. We shall soon know which gentleman or lady had business with a boiler at that hour. Who watched Tom? From the scullery door, he saw no face, only a sleeve, tweed, and the edge of a hat. "Richard wears tweed," I said. "So does half of England," returned Poirot, not without amusement. "Come, we will now see whether our cupboard preserves its modesty." The drawing-room was empty. The air in it had that particular stillness which belongs to shut rooms in old houses, and makes one think of people holding their breath behind doors. Poirot went at once to the small cupboard by the fire. The hair was broken. "Ah," said Poirot, quite content. "And the wax disturbed on the left." "Yes, and the key scratch fresh. Someone has visited our little prisoner." He opened the cupboard. The puppet lay within, exactly as I had left it, unless one counted a slight displacement of the head. Poirot touched the edge of the door and then showed me his fingertip, faintly darkened. "You see, Hastings, someone has touched. The wax carries its little memory. One does not need a witness when the stain confesses for itself. And so we know a hand has touched, but with care. Who would do that? And then leave it? A man who wished to ensure the evidence remained where he could produce it when required, or a man interrupted. At that precise moment, the door opened and Dr. Redfern stood there. He had a letter in his hand and his genial expression affixed. "Ah," he said, "I was told you were here, Mr. Poirot. I wanted to ask, purely in the interests of Miss Whitcombe, whether the object you secured last night might be better kept at the surgery. There is a locked cabinet." "The object is safe," said Poirot, smiling. His gaze dropped, not to the letter, but to the doctor's fingertips. The index and middle fingers of Redfern's right hand bore the faintest smut, a gray that might have been ink or soot. "You have been industrious this morning, doctor. I beg your pardon?" "Your notes? So many. One becomes marked by one's work." Redfern glanced at his fingers and laughed. "Ink. I have signed 6 prescriptions." "Nature is generous," said Poirot. "She puts ink on the hands of those who write, oil on the hands of those who mend engines, and black on the hands of those who meddle with threads." He bowed. "You will excuse us." When the doctor had gone, Poirot turned to me with his head slightly on one side, like a thrush listening for a worm. "Observe, Hastings. The cupboard has had a visitor. The boiler has had a visitor. The thread will perhaps have a visitor. It is time to invite." "In what manner?" "By behaving as though we had finished." He did exactly that. At tea, he was all urbanity. At dinner, he discoursed upon the scandal of indifferent sources. Afterward, the same little program was proposed. Cards with Clarissa, an early bed for Lady Margaret, Richard off to the yard, the doctor to his letters. Only Poirot, with apologetic hands, pleaded duties and vanished. At 10:30, sitting with Clarissa as the house shifted itself toward silence, I became aware of a sound, not unlike the drawing of a small bough across catgut. Faint, intermittent. Clarissa did not appear to notice it. I excused myself and strolled into the hall where Tom Perry, apparently polishing a stick, contrived to drop it. "Beg pardon, sir," he muttered. "Mr. Poirot says, if you'd please go to the top of the back stairs, quiet-like." I obeyed. The back stairs fell in a narrow well, lit by a single weak bulb. Somewhere below, something whispered, that catgut sound again. I descended 3 steps and halted. The whisper ceased. Then, very gently, it resumed. A thread sliding on wood. A hand came into view around the turn of the stair. A hand in a close-fitting leather glove. The fingertips darkened. The hand gave a firm, practiced tug. Once. Twice. From far above, the organ breathed one soft, obedient note, then another. "Bonsoir," said Poirot's voice, very polite, from the landing below. "I fear the theater is closed for repairs." The light snapped full on. The hand froze, then darted back. The owner of the glove turned to bolt, straight into Tom Perry's solid chest. "Steady, sir," said Tom. "Richard," I exclaimed, for it was he, flushed, panting, his cap pushed back, his glove smeared with the same pale soot I had seen upon the thread's path. For a heartbeat he stared at us all, Poirot, Tom, and me. Then he lifted his chin with a sort of reckless defiance. "Well," he said, "you've caught me. I was only seeing how the damned toy worked. If it's trickery you want, I'll show you trickery." "Your generosity overwhelms me," said Poirot. "You will remove the glove with care. Hastings, if you please." I took the glove. Across the palm ran a faint smear of darkened wax mixed with blacking. It had stained into the leather where the thread had been pulled. The glove itself stank faintly of oil. "Shall I fetch the inspector, sir?" Tom asked, almost eager. "Not yet," said Poirot. "We do not arrest people for curiosity." He looked at Richard. "You heard the music last night, but did not confess it. You are handy with engines. You know the house. You knew the hymn. And yet," he spread his hands, "I remain unsatisfied." Richard's mouth curled. "Are you? I'm damned if I'm going to be made the scapegoat because a set of old women have the jumps." "Courage, monsieur," said Poirot softly. "If you are a scapegoat, it is because someone drives you." He turned to Tom. "You will be so good as to escort Mr. Richard to his room, politely. If he prefers to remain with us, he is welcome." Richard hesitated. Anger, fear, calculation in quick succession, then shrugged. "Very well. I'll stay where you can see me. I have nothing to run from." "Excellent," said Poirot. "In that case, we will all go to the drawing-room and wait for our other guest." "Our other?" I began. The word was finished for me by the quiet opening of the drawing-room door. Dr. Redfern stood upon the threshold. He had no letter now, only his bag, which he placed with care upon the table. "I think," he said, "that this unpleasant charade should stop. Miss Whitcombe is in a state no physician could approve." "On that," said Poirot, "we are in agreement." Redfern's gaze fell to Richard's ungloved hand and the faint smear on his fingers. Then, in a movement that might have been nothing at all, he glanced toward the little cupboard by the fire. Poirot smiled with a sweetness that would have made a wiser man cautious. "By all means, doctor, open the cupboard. See for yourself that the bogey is harmless." There was the tiniest pause, no more than the time it takes for a gentleman to decide whether he is being invited to lead a dance or to fall into a pond. Then Redfern crossed to the cupboard and laid his hand upon the knob. He drew it back again with a faint frown and looked at his fingertips. They were faintly gray with the same wax pigment. "Unfortunate," murmured Poirot. "The brass is clean. Only the wax bears my little sentiment. It conveys itself, you see, like a calling card." Redfern's composure faltered. "This is ridiculous." "No," said Poirot in that same courteous tone. "Ridicule is what is offered to a young lady when she says she hears music that is in fact made to be heard. Tonight, gentlemen," he inclined his head to both of them, "we have finished with ridicule." He went to the bell pull and tugged gently. A minute later, Mrs. Holloway appeared, anxious and indignant by turns. "Mrs. Holloway," said Poirot, "you will be so good as to ask Lady Margaret and Miss Whitcombe to join us, and if Inspector Graves should presently arrive in answer to my note, show him in." Mrs. Holloway stared at Richard, at the doctor, at the closed cupboard, then vanished with commendable speed. Richard folded his arms and affected a sort of bored amusement. Redfern stared at the fire, as though calculating whether the embers would swallow a glove whole. Poirot, who is not above a little theater when he judges it medicinal, arranged the chairs in a neat half-circle and set the puppet, yes, the puppet, upon the hearthrug, with its waxing face turned delicately away, like a shy child awaiting presentation. He did all this with a serenity that irritated both our suspects beyond bearing. "Hastings," he said quietly, "you observe that we now have 2 hands marked, one with wax and soot, one with wax only. It is as I hoped. The one who pulls the thread and the one who protects the evidence need not be the same." "And which is which?" I whispered. He smiled. "In 5 minutes, mon ami, they will tell us." Lady Margaret came first, rigid with offense. Clarissa followed, white but determined. Mrs. Holloway hovered. Behind her, a heavy tread, Inspector Graves came to the door and halted, taking in the scene with professional dullness that I have learned is not dullness at all. "Inspector," said Poirot, warmly, "you arrive at the most convenient moment. Kindly be seated. We are only waiting." He glanced toward the corridor with an air of domestic patience, for the last little thread to be drawn. Somewhere distant in the house, a door shut softly. In the silence that followed, a brittle fleck of wax, darkened with the soot Poirot had mixed into it, cracked loose from the puppet's sleeve and dropped to the hearth. The tiny thing fell with an absurd delicacy. Yet when Clarissa saw it, she gave a single sharp laugh, the laugh of one who refuses to be frightened any longer, even by trifles. Poirot looked at her with approval. "Madame's monsieur," he said, "we are now ready for the truth." And with that, like a conjurer who is about to show the second half of his trick. He sat down perfectly at ease and folded his hands. Chapter 6. The Truth at Blackwood Grange. There is a moment when Poirot clears his throat that makes all other noises in a room insignificant. Chairs creak. Clocks tick. Fires mutter. But when Poirot's little cough is heard, the stage is his. That night at Blackwood Grange, as we sat with puppet, suspects, and Inspector Graves in uneasy half-circle, I felt the air tighten in readiness. "My friends," said Poirot, "we are assembled not for a séance, but for a reckoning. The ghost has spoken, yes, but not with the voice of heaven. It has spoken with the voice of men. It remains only to decide which man and for what reason." Lady Margaret's eyes flashed. "This melodrama is intolerable." "Pardon, madam, the melodrama was already intolerable, and you bore it in your house for weeks. I merely end it." He rose, took 2 steps to the puppet, and touched it lightly with the toe of his patent leather shoe. This child of wax, pitiful and cruel, it frightened, yes. But it could not itself unlock a door, nor know the hymn of Mademoiselle Clarissa's childhood. That required 2 things. First, knowledge, intimate. Second, hands, practical. These 2 things belong to 2 men seated here, Dr. Redfern. Stirred. Richard gave a laugh too loud. Poirot lifted a finger. One pulled the thread. The other arranged that the evidence should not betray them. Between them, they contrived that a young woman should be thought mad, and thus removed. Removed? Clarissa's voice was scarcely a whisper. "Consider, mademoiselle. If you were declared unfit, if you were carried away for your nerves, who then would administer Blackwood Grange? Not you? Your aunt?" "Yes, with the counsel of the useful cousin and the physician to advise that her course is just. Between them, power, property, profit." Richard sprang up. "That's a damned lie. I have no interest in paperwork. Let Aunt Margaret tally her ledgers till doomsday. I'd as soon fish." "Precisely, monsieur," said Poirot softly. "It is not you who desired the ledgers. It is the good doctor." All eyes turned to Redfern. He did not move at once, but his mouth tightened. Poirot went on. "It was you, doctor, who prescribed removal. You who pressed that Miss Whitcomb's fancies were dangerous. You who knew of her hymn, learned when you paid those friendly visits after her father's death. You had only to hint, to suggest, to guide. But a physician cannot act alone. He required a hand to pull the thread, to run the cord, to mend the pump when it sulked. For that, Richard's face burned. He told me it was only to put a scare into Clarissa, to cure her nerves by showing her what nonsense it all was. I never meant— Redfern's hand struck the table. Fool, if you had had the sense to keep out of sight. Monsieur, said Poirot, raising both palms, the quarrel is unnecessary. We have the glove with soot, the fingers with wax, the marks by the boiler, the cupboard disturbed. One protected the trick, the other operated it. Both were willing to see a gentlewoman undone. Inspector Graves cleared his throat, with a noise like boots on gravel. That'll do, gentlemen. Dr. Alfred Redfern, Richard Whitcombe, I'll have you both come along with me. Conspiracy and fraud to start with, and perhaps worse when the Crown Solicitor has his say. Richard muttered something about betrayal, and shot a look at Clarissa, half pleading, half ashamed. She turned her face away. Redfern attempted dignity, but found none. Mrs. Holloway gave a sharp, pitying sniff as the inspector marched them out. When the door shut, silence fell. Lady Margaret sat rigid, her knitting still in her lap. My family, she said at last, paraded before servants and strangers like common criminals. Better paraded than succeeded, Poirot returned gravely. You, madam, must see that the affairs of the house are henceforth managed with justice, not with suppression. Your niece has been wronged. You will not add to the wrong. Lady Margaret looked as if she might protest. Then, to my astonishment, her proud head bowed a fraction. It shall be so. Clarissa rose, very pale, but with a steadiness in her eyes that had not been there before. Mr. Poirot, she said simply, I owe you more than thanks. You have given me back my reason, and my courage, Poirot bowed, hand upon his heart. Mademoiselle, I have done no more than uncover the trick. The courage. You supplied yourself. He offered her his arm to the door, and for once I saw a color rise in her cheek that had nothing to do with fear. Later, as we took our leave, the wind had dropped, and the moors lay stark beneath a faint gleam of moon. Blackwood Grange, with its tower and its dark windows, seemed at last a house of stone and timber only, not a place of phantoms. Poirot drew his coat about him with satisfaction. It is always the same, Hastings. The ghosts, they walk in stories to frighten children. In life, it is men and women who dress themselves in sheets and play the organ in the night, and they do it for money, for power, for vanity. Never yet for the sheer love of haunting. He gave a small, disdainful shrug. Bah! Even the ghosts, they must be practical. I laughed, though with a trace of weariness. And Clarissa? Clarissa will endure. She is stronger than she knows, and with Lady Margaret chastened, she will have peace. That is all she asked of us. The motor started with a cheerful growl, and we rolled away from the Grange. I looked back once, half expecting some pale figure to appear at the window in farewell. But the house remained blank, impassive, unyielding to fancy. Only Poirot beside me hummed a little under his breath. Not a hymn, but a sprightly tune of his own devising, as if to exorcise with melody the last shadow of the ghost of Blackwood Grange. Epilogue. Some weeks later, when the wind no longer carried the bitter note of the northern moors but the softer airs of London spring, I found myself thinking back upon the strange days at Blackwood Grange. It was curious, I reflected, how quickly a tale of ghosts and haunted corridors lost its terror, once explained in terms of wires and wax. And yet, though I knew every thread of the trick, I could not altogether rid myself of a shiver whenever I recalled the pale figure on the terrace, hand uplifted against the frost. Poirot, as ever, took a more comfortable view. He sat in his armchair at Whitehaven, slippers precise, mustaches immaculate, and regarded me with the air of one who finds amusement in the naive taste of others. Mon ami Hastings, he said, you English love your phantoms. You would rather have a ghost than a boiler, a curse than a cousin with ambition. But ghosts, they vanish in the daylight. What remains is the human heart, with its jealousies, its anxieties, its greed. That is the only specter that never dies. I could not deny his wisdom, though I teased him by suggesting that one day even he might encounter an apparition that refused to yield to his reason. He chuckled, wagging a finger. When such a day arrives, my friend, it will not be Hercule Poirot who is afraid. It will be the ghost. And with that, he arranged the fire tongs into an exact parallel and closed his eyes, perfectly at peace. As for myself, I could not help glancing once or twice toward the shadowed corners of the room. For though I am a man of sense, there are moments when I half believe the waxen child of Blackwood Grange still waits, with her hand raised, beckoning, and so concludes The Ghost of Blackwood Grange. a tale of apparitions that proved no more than wires, wax, and human ambition. Though perhaps the chill of the moors will linger in memory longer than the trick itself. This story was written by us in homage to Agatha Christie, inspired by the traditions of English ghost stories, yet entirely our own invention. If you've listened all the way to the end, then you are the reason these stories continue to exist. I want to thank you for being part of this growing community. I read every comment, and your thoughts and your encouragement are what make sharing these mysteries such a joy. Until our next mystery, good night.